It's 2025, a new year and the best time to turn your great idea into a business. Shopify is how you're going to make it happen. Let me tell you how. Shopify makes it simple to create your brand, open for business, and get your first sale. Get your store up and running easily with thousands of customizable templates. All you need to do is drag and drop. Their powerful social media tools let you connect all your channels and create shoppable posts. Established in 2025. Has a nice ring to it, doesn't it? Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/promo. All lowercase. Go to shopify.com/promo to start selling with Shopify today. Shopify.com/promo.
The government is now recruiting a new Chief Inspector of Borders who lives in Finland and wants to work from home. This is not serious. Why should the British public put up with this?
Prime Minister.
The individual in question was appointed in 2019 by the last government to a senior position. He then worked for 5 years from Finland. We've changed that, and he's now going to be working from the United Kingdom full-time.
Welcome to Quiet Riot, the political podcast that aims to make sober analysis with giddy levity. I'm Andreou.
And I'm Naomi Smith, the shaker to his stir.
And I'm producer Kenny, the Scotch, trying to keep this thing from being on the rocks.
Our aim is to keep you up to speed on the news without paralysing you with anxiety and give you actions to take on the issues of the day.
So get your pen and paper to take notes as we begin another Quiet Riot.
Hello and welcome, I'm Alex.
And I'm Naomi. Before we begin, a gentle reminder to sign up to back us at ko-fi.com/quietriotpod if you can. And if you're totally brassic, just leave us a review wherever you get your podcasts, because all of that helps to keep this show in your ears.
Now, on this week's Quiet Riot, with the date for the Starmer-von der Leyen summit set, we ask what is the best route back to the EU, and can those who wish it unify behind one journey?
Plus, we'll explore the state of science and innovation in the UK, from AI and its regulation or not, to policy on science funding, and who better to help us do both of those things than today's guest, founder of Scientists for EU and chair of the European movement, Mike Galsworthy. Welcome, Mike.
Hi. Lovely to be here.
Mike, you're known for many things as a scientist, campaigner, commentator, but rather like Naomi and myself, you're also quite famous for your luscious locks. Can you talk us through your hair care regime?
I wash my hair every day. Sometimes it requires a bit of salt spray if it's getting unruly.
Oh, really?
I should actually cut it more regularly than I do, according to my mother. But for the most part, it gets far too much attention and distracts from
The serious point. Stop objectifying
who
Mike.
I fundamentally am as a person and as a soul moving through this world.
But I think you're like a younger AC Grayling, who, of course, is very famously the main of Remain.
Oh,
You've got this gorgeous, long, luscious locks.
Oh, dear. Now, we are all frustrated by the seemingly slow progress of the reset. Great men large hopeful promises may utter, but words did never fish or parsnips butter. Best for Britain launched a landmark report this week, which Naomi talked us through on Sunday, so do go back and listen to that episode if you've not done so already before diving back in here. Now, its starting point is what government says are its red lines, and what is possible within those. The grassroots organisation Mike chairs, European Movement, on the other hand, wants Starmer to ditch the red lines and go further and faster. Now, these two approaches are often presented and seen by the supporters as oppositional, or at the very least competing. But are they? Or do we actually need both? Mike, it seems to me that European Movement's approach seeks to widen the window of what is politically possible, while Best for Britain kind of produces out-of-the-box policy solutions that take advantage of that widening. How do you see it?
The way I see it, and the way I've always seen it, is that we have an ecosystem here. We have a direction of travel that we're all going in. And if we want to effectively move this country back to being a responsible player at the heart of Europe, preserving and building on all those British European values that we treasure, it's going to take more than one entity to do it. And different campaigns and organisations all pick up different roles. And in fact, there's a scale too from the proximal, which is closest to where the government is now, and saying, come on a little bit further this way, you can do this, to those who are saying, that is the shining castle on the hill that we want to reach. That is where we are going. And so to have both those elements as sort of an end vision, which you keep alive, you deliberately keep alive and put the flames into, but at the same time, mapping out the pathway from short-term to mid-term to longer-term, all of that is absolutely vital.
So why is it so often actually an argument within the supporters?
It's so much less so now.
In the sort of Remain camp I think, no, my solution is you should be saying rejoin now, or no, what you're doing is not enough, I think all of that frothiness has actually died down a lot. I think it was certainly there when I was coming in as chair of EM. What's the solution? Is it rejoin now or is it sort of step by step slowly? But I think because we have all been so bludgeoned by reality for so long that the people in the community at large are much more seasoned veterans now. Yeah. They are more realistic. They understand roles better. Certainly within EM UK, we had a lot of internal conversation that was good and cohesive, and I feel that it's all in a very collaborative place now. And I also think that between different organisations, that all feels like better glue is coming together now. And when that works, it's actually really good fun. Naomi, you run an organisation that explicitly seeks to influence policy. Is there a risk that any organisation that tries to lobby government can make itself less relevant if it pushes for stuff it knows will not happen?
Yeah.
Do you see what I mean?
Totally.
So the other side of that balance.
Yeah.
Or does the pushing for something have intrinsic value, right? Does setting out the thing to say...
But both things are true, Alex. So when you look at the Leave coalition, and by that I mean you had everything from people like Daniel Hannan during the campaign saying we probably won't even leave the single market, we just need to be out of the actual EU, right through to those who said, not only are we going to leave, we don't want a deal.
I believed in freedom, and I believed that our country had a great, great future.
You were the leader. You were leading us into this. You told us that we should do this, and you hadn't devoted any serious thought to what came next.
Come on. So I wanted to win an argument.
What you had by having that broad ecosystem on that side, and I hate the word ecosystem, by the way.
Oh, I love it. I'm a biologist, so it inherently makes sense to me that this is how...
that used the word earlier, widening the terms of debate. And what having that very rabid, angry, let's go WTO was their sort of stock phrase. Fuck a trade deal. We don't want one at all. We'll just do WTO rule trade with the EU. That meant that we ended up with a very, very hard version of Brexit with a deal, right?
Moderate by comparison.
Right. And so, of course, you need it all. But to answer your question about relevance, well, relevant with whom, if you are asking in terms of having an ear of policymakers who may not agree with the red lines, but through collective responsibility are bound by them, and you want to get a fair hearing and listen, then you have to meet them where they are at. And in a way, that is exactly the same as where we are with voters. You have to go to where voters are, both physically, the spaces that they occupy, the informational areas that they're in, and in person. And we've known this. We've known this for a long time. You were not stupid to vote Leave. You were lied to. And all of that. So you've got to sort of meet people where they are, whether that is government or whether it is a voter.
That's interesting because, Mike, EM is a grassroots organization, first and foremost, and it organizes a lot of events. You know, I was looking at your list. Mm-hmm. You're a busy bee, from marches to everything to coffee socials, and you have your third conference this Saturday. How important do you think upwards pressure is?
Absolutely.
Or is it only
vital.
Lateral things that matter?
It's
1 year into a 5-year term is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, it's absolutely vital, because what we're talking about here is not a political party winning, but rather how do you move all of UK society in the same direction? You've got 3 strands of action, really. One is on the Parliament. It's only about 650 people, but it includes the government and the opposition.
Yeah.
You know, it's all the MPs. So that's a focused target. But then you've got the partners as well. And so that is the Commission. That is the heads of the other member states. But that is also the big business groups, you know, responsible for farming, fishing, pharmaceuticals, all of that. Mm-hmm. But then you've got the public as the third P. And you have to realize with the public, it is complicated. You've got different age demographics, you've got different geographical demographics, you've got different sectors of industry, you've got different outlooks that absorb different information. But if you want to actually take a country from the state of Brexit that we're in to actually going into EU membership again, or closer to EU membership, whatever level you can get to, in each and every stage, you have to make sure that everyone feels democratically on board, that people aren't left behind in that way. And this is actually where the Brexiteers have got it wrong. You know, for all the swift operation they did, you know, pushing for many years, but then they sold people out at the end push. They lied to them. They couldn't follow through with lots of promises, which is why their solution isn't holding with the public, as you can see.
It almost immediately.
So instead of got Kemi Badenoch saying we didn't have a plan.
Exactly. Yeah. So instead of copying what they're doing on that front, we want to build it on our own terms, which is all about inclusive society. And that means over 100 local groups on the ground, which are our branches, which then go and talk not just to MPs, but also to local businesses. When you have a youth mobility scheme, that has to be about, well, how could your local businesses, you know, benefit from this with talent coming in? But how could your youth go out there and what's the skills that they can get? At each and every level, it needs to be made relevant to each and every community, whether that be geographically or demographically or what have you.
As a punter,
yeah,
when we've done big things, you know, that massive March for a Second referendum or that unprecedented petition, and they don't even move the dial at all. They literally
do
just
move the dial,
explicitly ignored. How do you keep people going?
Right. So that's a slightly different challenge there, because that's about keeping the base fired up. You know, for those big marches.
And renewed.
Yes.
And young people coming in.
You're activating a big showpiece, which of course the government sees, but they're also looking at their polling overall. They're also looking at other factors, but they do see the power of it and they do see the attention that it's getting. And what you had in 2017, 18 and 19 was a really small window within which a huge battle was happening. Everything was to deadlines and it was all about show and attention, whereas now we actually have, I don't want to say the luxury of time, but we do have more time to build something that is deeper and more responsible. And the granularity of it, absolutely everywhere, matters. We're not trying to tip something just over the line here. We're trying to rewire a more responsible country that gives more agency to all these demographics into different areas. And part of my other project, which is the Bylines Network, where you've got citizen journalism, 10 different publications, going out and working with universities and working with disadvantaged groups to get their voices heard, bring those individuals through. It's a long-term project in order to get the information mix around people in regional areas better, fairer, more community-minded.
A mycelial network, basically, rather than a brain.
And that is
things.
bloody resource intensive. And I'm incredibly glad that Best for Britain doesn't run grassroots groups so that we can concentrate on other things, but safe in the knowledge that people are organising normal people in their local communities to exert pressure, to identify the grass top, as we like to refer to them, the person that stands a little bit taller than the grassroots that's a bit of a community leader on this.
Can I ask you then? We have often talked about the huge amount of money that's sloshing around right-wing think tanks and anyone that promises lower taxes, anti-migrant organizations, compared to the scant resources that are available for the other side. Does that lack of resources make the space that you coexist in a little bit scrappy sometimes? Because you are competing for the same donors.
And it's a dwindling pool of increasingly older philanthropic political actors. There aren't many of them in the UK. We don't have a culture of political giving like, say, the US does on both sides of their divide. And that is incredibly stressful and frustrating. It probably takes up the lion's share of the time of the people that lead any of the organisations, but it is by no means restricted to the pro-European actors within British civil society. It extends to progressive causes across the piece, whether they are doing work on resilient democracy, whether they're doing work on constitutional issues, whatever. It is incredibly difficult. And there are the same very small pool of people funding all of them, and increasingly few. Some have exited the UK altogether in recent years. So, of course, that does. When we look at the big foundations like Joseph Rowntree Reform Trust, which would have a mandate to be funding things around citizens journalism, certainly around anything pro-democracy, internationalism. They actually don't have a huge pot of cash, but it tends to be distributed in relatively low dollar amounts to a large number of donees. And so therefore the impact is diluted along with the money, right? So all of that together is incredibly frustrating and certainly adds to it. But I think the grown-up organisations, the mature ones within the space, understand that you can't blame each other for that. We've just got to try and be smarter in how we work.
As a punter, why don't you get together and share a lot of costs? Wouldn't there be efficiencies in creating one uber progressive think tank that does all of this stuff, rather than have this fragmented space that forces you into competition with each other?
Okay, so
in certain respects, I understand there is collaboration, but in other respects, you are in competition with each other.
Actually, not really, because the overwhelming money that we get in is via our over 25,000 members. And that is a deliberate model that was started under my predecessors, but I've doubled down on because it gives it not only extra legitimacy, but also that stability is really, really important. I mean, I know what it's like to go hunting round hand to mouth and how much time that takes up. So whereas Naomi's burden is a lot of time on being able to engage those people and get that funding and manage, and that's the management burden that you have as a think tank like that. Ours is the internal dynamics, for example, in Byline's network or on European movement. It's the management of dozens of groups or 10 different publications, the internal personal dynamics of volunteers. There isn't actually direct competition, I don't think, at all. And there is a lot of complementary stuff. And there is a lot of advantage by coming together and working on similar strands. The nice thing is when you've got something like the Youth Mobility Scheme or you've got SPS deals, to be able to coordinate different organisations to come together and say, you be the cavalry here, we'll be the pikemen there, and we've lined up these people over here to be the archers there. That's how you coordinate on something. And using that different motley set of skills and angles is really useful. Now, there's always a case for organisations coming together or maybe breaking apart and spinning out. But as long as the broader, and environment supports supports that kind of working, you're in a good place. Now, I always argued, for example, with the Britain Stronger in Europe campaign, them being a monolith absolutely killed them.
Yeah.
They didn't know how to engage with the grassroots.
Totally.
They didn't know how to engage with sectoral campaigns. I complained about this endlessly, and they told me, oh no, we're trying to win this thing on economic threat, all this other stuff, Mike, is legacy stuff, which is great for you, which is lovely, but we don't care about that. And just like with the Scottish referendum in 2014, if you have a top-down monolith, hundreds of different grassroots campaigns can run rings around you because they can be experimental. Some of them can pop and die. Others can say things that absolutely have no sign-off from anyone in importance, but then those lines work. And so you've got to think about how you cultivate that kind of dynamic as well. And this was one of my major issues with the People's Vote campaign as well, in that was far too top-down and didn't invest money and resources in the grassroots, either geographically or sectorally, so that they had liberty to go and be innovative. And they were trying to more and more close it down into a system that they ran. And I thought they had no chance of actually winning a referendum on any vote, because even though they could run a little team themselves, they could not be the host of a wider network of activity.
Now, this is an advertisement for BetterHelp Therapy Online, who are sponsoring today's episode. Thank you to them, and here's a little more about their service. When it comes to relationships, we hear a lot about the so-called red flags we should beware. But have you considered that there may be green flags as well? It's a positive take on a very serious subject, the idea that we should be looking for specific signs that a relationship will be loving. But what signs should we seek? If you're unsure, therapy can help you identify green flags, actively focus on them in your relationships, and, just as importantly, embody that green flag energy yourself. Whether you're dating, married, building a friendship, or just working on being your best self, it's important to form relationships that love you back. This is where therapy can come in. It can be helpful for learning positive coping skills. It can teach you about setting personal boundaries, and it can empower you to be the best version of yourself. Therapy, then, isn't only something that's of benefit to those who have experienced major trauma. It can be incredibly useful in helping us navigate the day-to-day challenges that life throws at us, including those interpersonal challenges that can prove so tricky to navigate. With over 5,000 therapists in the UK already, BetterHelp can provide access to mental health professionals with a diverse variety of expertise in mental health. Discover your relationship green flags with BetterHelp. Our listeners get 10% off their first month at betterhelp.com/Quiet Riot. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/Quiet Riot.
Quiet Riot. Most polling suggests that those who voted Remain are slightly more loyal to saying they would vote Rejoin than Leave voters are to say that they would vote to stay out. But the principal driver, and this has been true throughout the whole period since 2016, the principal driver of what's been a modest rise in support for being inside the European Union has been those who didn't vote in 2016, some of whom, of course, were too young to vote, and we know that young people are particularly keen on rejoining the European Union.
You wanted to ask about the steps towards rejoining.
I'll tell you what I want to ask.
Go on.
What I want to throw out to both of you, okay? Keir Starmer comes out tomorrow and announces that the UK is applying to rejoin the European Union, all right? Dream or nightmare?
Tomorrow?
Yeah, tomorrow.
I'll say that. I'd say
a lot
nightmare.
of people have this Hugh Grant Love Actually fantasy of the Prime Minister kind of having this big moment. As a European, without sufficient pitch rolling,
it would fail.
The European Union would see it
Totally.
as the flip side of the same exceptionalism that delivered Brexit to suddenly say that. And also because one of the most successful aspects of the Brexit campaign was to present the European Union as a thing that's being imposed on you by politicians. It feels to me that Labour have to be following the curve of where public opinion is, rather than trying to push it.
And public opinion is broadly in favour of, well, certainly they believe the whole thing was a fucking mistake. And, whether that fully, solidly enough, with a big enough lead in the polls, has now led to, and yes, we should rejoin, that's still probably not quite where we would need it to be. And I agree with you that the work has not been done in Europe either. So I think to launch that, that would be a gift to Nigel Farage.
Absolutely, because
an absolute gift.
There would be no conviction in
it.
There would be no fundamental soul or model or passion in it. It would be led by a number 10 that hasn't fully engaged with the right communities for it. I mean, this taps into something that we were talking just before coming in here, Naomi and I, which was, and Naomi said, why don't you ask me that? Which is, does this government at the moment have internally even its own sufficient resources to make a major gain at the summit coming up? Or is it really going to need think tanks and campaigns and creativity on the Commission's part and other member state governments to actually flood the zone positively in this time frame now, to actually give something to actually work with, to feel a bit encouraged by?
Well, our report was designed for those that want the government to achieve its growth mission. That's their number one aim. For those of us that want to fight populism and the rise of it, that is so inextricably linked to closing wealth inequality in this country, you wouldn't believe. And in order to do that, you need to have some wealth to redistribute. That is only going to come from growth. And for those that ideologically would like us to have a closer relationship with Europe, which throughout the election campaign, Starmer and his top team did say, we want to reset that relationship, we want a better, deeper relationship, and we think that the trade deal that Johnson negotiated was simply not good enough. It's not working for British business. So what we have put forward to them is a plan that is within their red lines, that may be rebuffed by the EU, maybe goes nowhere in terms of the full-blown, full-fat version of it, but it at least gives you a number on the direction of travel that could be achieved. And what I would say is that I think there is a lot of talk about the detail of the reset now happening in government. I think that is happening. We know that they are writing their industrial and trade strategy in parallel to all of this, and you cannot divorce those things. I don't think there is a government department, whether that's health and understanding the lack of midwives and nurses and doctors and all the rest of it, social care and the impact of Brexit on that sector. Of course, all of those conversations are happening. And I think that the work that we've done gives those that want growth for whatever reason a rationale for saying this is the best way to do it for the entire country. Other things being discussed around growth in and around government at the moment, and we are going to come to it in part 2 when we're going to talk about regulation of tech and things like that. The other argument is we'll get growth through deregulation, and we will deregulate almost everything. And my response to that is, yes, you will get some growth from that, but it will be concentrated in London and the South East. And I don't think that's what you meant when you said you wanted growth. I think you want growth for the whole country. And what our work very brilliantly did, I would commend our team for doing, is showing the regional and national breakdown of that growth across the UK, and it disproportionately benefits West Midlands, East Midlands, Yorkshire and the North. And to Mike's point about who can do what now, are they a rabbit in the headlights or can they be persuaded by certain groups? Without question, I would say right now, the government knows where the public is. The polling has been very clear for a long time and is only going in one direction, which interestingly is why even David Frost and Nigel Farage don't actually talk about Brexit that much anymore. And certainly we haven't seen the Conservatives say anything about our report.
They're beginning to distance themselves from it.
And Kemi Badenoch's comments last week.
They're beginning to call it Johnson's Brexit.
Right, exactly.
Like quite consistently last month.
But the single most influential group that needs to step up now is business of every size, of every industry, of every location across the UK. Their moment for maximum influence is right now, and they need to get behind alignment, and they need to be pushing the government in this critical period in the run-up to that summit. If government feels that business is backing them, then I think we've got a far greater chance of achieving it.
Right. Call to action, considering how focused the conversation has been on your respective organisations. I suspect you both have one. So what's yours, Mike?
My call to action is come and join European Movement UK. We're growing fast. If you feel as though you can't afford to, you can actually join at a lower rate. Or if you're still cautious, at least get on the email list, and then you can be updated with everything we're doing. But there's a lot of people out there that feel passionately about this, and they're thinking, but what can I do? I'm not a big business. I'm not a think tank. I can't influence directly. Through our membership and our local groups and the relations that we build with MPs, which also spans into the all-party parliamentary group on Europe, we have that big community that you should just join.
And I have been a member of European Movement for a very long time.
And you're also a patron.
I am. Oh, yeah, I forgot about that.
So there we go. Oh, you're so competitive. Like, how do you stop yourselves from fighting each other? It's kind of like, no, we do actually work together.
And
we'll drop a link in the show
at
notes.
Best for Britain, the call to action this week is to share our growth report with your MP. There's a couple of clicks in it. We'll leave a link in the show notes. Make sure that your MP cannot stand up in Parliament and say they don't know what the hell we're talking about when we say 2.2% GDP growth in the long term is achievable with alignment on goods and services.
Not to teach my grandmother to suck eggs, but can I add a call to action based on what you've said? If you work for a business, especially if you're part of the management of a business that has suffered because of Brexit, then get your boss, get the owner of that business to tell government about the report on growth.
Well done.
Quiet Riot. This episode is brought to you by Hill's Pet Nutrition. Every shelter pet deserves a second chance, and you're making it possible for thousands of them every day. Because when you feed your pet Hill's, you help feed a shelter pet, which helps make them healthy, happy, and more adoptable, changing their life forever. So they can change yours. Over 15 million shelter pets fed and adopted. Science did that. Visit hillspet.com/podcast to learn more. Quiet Riot.
And once again, we reach that time of the week when Alex scours the right-wing media so that you don't have to, in search of the most egregious woke labelling this week. It's time for Wokey Dokey.
Wokey Dokey.
Alex, what have you unearthed for us this time?
Michael Deacon of The Telegraph he's been responsible for a series of corkers recently, like last week's LGBT is over whether the BBC likes it or not.
What, is it cured? Is this conversion therapy?
Listen, as a gay man, I'm in the dark.
Are you cured?
I have been having strange feelings about you recently.
It's
so
the hair.
This week, he has made it to the top of the Wokey Dokey in tray by squeezing out this curler. At last, the Church of England is standing up to wokery. Now, this is about a suggestion, it was just a suggestion, for the option to exist of non-alcoholic wine and gluten-free wafers to be available for recovering alcoholics and celiacs.
Yeah, celiac.
Wishing to take communion, right? Not on Michael's watch.
Uh-oh.
No, shut that down.
He writes...
Wait, a celiac's woke?
Catering to people that aren't you is woke, isn't it?
Yeah. So bear with me, because it's interesting that he doesn't tackle either of those things, right? So what he writes is the proposal may have been well-meaning, but it sounds desperately tacky. I have no idea. And in any case, there is no biblical precedent for it. Now strap in for this week's Telegraph sermon. This is going to be a wild ride. After all, he says, when Jesus was feeding the 5,000, he didn't have to put up with Guardian readers saying, sorry, but my nutritionist says I should avoid wheat because it makes me feel bloated. What? You don't have any Waitrose free from gluten sourdough? Well, this is very disappointing, I must say. Similarly, he continues, think of the wedding at Cana. It wouldn't have seemed much of a miracle if Jesus had turned water into alcohol-free wine. Alcohol-free wine may be an ingenious way for supermarkets to make easy money out of middle-class saps doing dry January, but it's hardly a symbol of divinity.
Wow.
Most crucially of all, though, think of the Last Supper.
Right.
When Jesus invited the disciples to drink, he did not say, obviously anyone who's off booze can have the sparkling water instead.
Well, if it's your Last Supper, you don't really care if it's going to give you bellyache.
I'm not religious, but I have been raised in a religious community, so I'm vaguely aware of stuff. So it's quite disappointing to have a man called deacon not grasp the basics of the fact that Christ is meant to have given them his blood and his flesh. That's kind of the whole basis of Christianity, right? That this is a magical thing going on here. It's not about whether there's alcohol in the booze or not. Not to mention the fact that the Last Supper was actually a Passover meal. The most restrictive dietarily thing, especially on gluten, by the way.
Yeah. Unleavened bread.
You cannot cross-contaminate other foods with a bit of the gluten in the matzah during Passover. It's like a massive no-no.
Oh, I love matzah.
Anyway.
Can't believe they were so woke back then.
Listen,
Don't get me
so
started on Jesus and his sandals.
I know. I found this very interesting because it took two things to accommodate people that do have a serious problem. You know, I have experienced up close the trauma and struggle of someone trying to get clean
and stay away
from alcohol.
Booze, yeah.
And I know that even a tiny amount of alcohol can trigger a relapse. And so to look at that and reduce it down to a Guardian reader whose nutritionists has advised them to stay away from wheat because it makes them feel bloated. I think it's just such a cheap fucking shot, actually.
Yeah.
I just don't understand this constant belittling of anything that is effectively a struggle. Because that's what happens at the Telegraph.
And it's not
like
taking...
anything that is, like mental health issues, alcoholism, weak. It really
strongman theory of history. The weak can die.
I mean, for all the kind of sneering, the use of the word sneering that we get from predictable quarters, there is nothing but sneering.
Like, talking about alcohol-free wine is only of use to middle-class saps doing dry January. I really do find that extraordinary.
Thanks, Alex. We might even start a Woke Watch channel on our Discord. If you want to join it, sign up as a monthly backer.
I think that's a really good idea.
And share your woke finds on there with fellow travellers. Just visit ko-fi.com/Quiet Riot Pod for details. Quiet Riot. This week, global leaders, including Emmanuel Macron, Narendra Modi and JD Vance, gathered in Paris for an AI summit. 60 countries signed up to a declaration to make sure AI is open, inclusive, transparent, ethical, safe, secure, trustworthy, and takes into account international frameworks for all and making AI sustainable for people and planet. China signed it. The UK and the US refused. There's been intense speculation that the government is trying to curry yet more favour with Trump and global investors by shunning the, quote, excessive regulation of Europe, according to JD Vance. Meanwhile, back in America, Elon has made a bid of almost $100 billion for OpenAI. He's been swiftly rebuffed by Sam Altman, who took the opportunity to throw a bit of shade. Let's have a listen.
Do you think Musk's approach then is from a position of insecurity about XAI?
Probably his whole life is from a position of insecurity. I feel for the guy.
You feel for him?
I do, actually. I don't think he's like a happy person. I do feel for him.
Okay.
Mike.
Yeah.
First and foremost, you're a scientist.
Yes.
You dabbled in tech.
Yeah.
Do UK tech and our innovators want less regulation in the UK?
In some places, yes. For example, when it comes to the framework of the EU, 90% of tech businesses were for Remain, and they want not just the access to talent that exists right across Europe, and there's a lot of talent in Eastern Europe there, but also being in a market, a larger market, where they can grow quickly. Also, from the science front, I know a professor of artificial intelligence that lamented very passionately us being essentially pulled out of the Horizon network for a while, because the EU has a variety of supercomputers that we just don't have in the UK that he badly needed for his
physical resources.
Yeah, sure. No, the three scientific entities in the world that do big science infrastructure are the US, China, and Europe. All three of them have similar-ish volumes of academic output and similar volumes of research laborers. But in terms of impactful publications, China is well behind, but is catching up super rapidly. But essentially,
but what less regulation would they want? You said they would maybe want some.
Well, all businesses want less red tape in terms of hiring and firing or hoops that they have to jump through. However, more important than that is actually knowing the landscape that they are in and accessing money. Yep. It's the certainty and it's the capital investment that are the most important things to them.
I want to ask about that. UK science is pretty world class. I mean, it's not necessarily the best of us, but it is world class.
Most impactful.
In terms of share of global citations, share of highly cited papers, and of course, we're a major exporter of higher education and a trainer of the world's scientists. We're one of the major hubs for that. But we're certainly not world leading when it comes to R&D spending as a proportion of GDP.
Correct.
And we are stuck in what appears to be a particularly acute low productivity trap.
Yes.
Which suggests that science and technology are not currently delivering superpowered outcomes for the UK.
Yep.
What would supercharge it?
I mean, a full embrace of the EU again with all of those structures. And I'm not just saying this because I'm campaigning on it, but if you think about the way the world is structured for science in particular, before we come on to technology and the development of that science, but for science, it is the States, Europe as a whole, and you can talk about Europe as a whole because it has been so thoroughly networked now, and China. Those are the three entities. So when the government has banged up...
India not catching up on that?
India's on the rise, but one of the big things that also makes a difference is how multinational your research is. Yeah. It increases the quality a lot, and China is obviously far behind on that, as is India. One of the things that really frustrated me with the government previously is talking about making the UK a science superpower. It's like, no, it's a power, but it's not superpower as in world dominating, can push around markets, things like that. But leading Europe as a whole, and usually when we were on Horizon or FP7 or something like that, we would lead about a third of the projects, even higher in life sciences.
And when you say we, is that Oxford, Cambridge, ARC, or was it genuinely nationally distributed across our HE institutions?
Generally nationally distributed, very well. There was a drive to complement the golden triangle, they call it, between London, Oxford and Cambridge, with investment in other universities. But unfortunately, Brexit and now this government doubling down on the golden triangle means that for other universities, it's a lot more hand to mouth, and you get the kind of regional inequalities coming into play. But essentially, what we need is to be back in the European framework, and that European framework to sing up all of its research institutes. It's not just about universities, right? For all the Brexiteers I've had saying, no, but none of them are in the top 10, it's like, that's not where research is done in Europe. They don't know anything about Karolinska Institute, Fraunhofer, and, the CNRS, all the big ones. They don't know about those networks.
Or the very specialist ones, because
exactly.
There's like a huge network of really specialized, you go to Bristol if you want to research this one particular
Exactly.
issue.
Anyone doing their PhD is not looking at, I want to do it in Oxford, I want to do it in Cambridge. They're looking at, who do I want to do it with?
Yeah.
And there just so happens to be, big concentrations in Oxford and Cambridge and London, but sometimes the top person in the world will be in Bristol or Newcastle or whatever, right? The ability to have a pot of funding that allows people to put together whatever constellations and jigsaws they need to tackle an issue is why Europe as a whole is a science superpower. And the problem that it faces is, one, America has traditionally got a lot of global attention for talent. And secondly, obviously China's on the rise. However, there is a real opportunity right now, given the way Trump's behaving, for a brain drain from the States. And also, it's not just brain drain from the States, it's the brain diversion that would usually, habitually, unthinkingly flow off to the States that are now going to be spooked, especially from global South countries where they're worried about the racism, as well as now the barriers to funding. And the UK and Europe should move on this, and they should get together to move on this. And one of the things they can do is actually, along the lines of Draghi, have some sensible deregulation around stimulating investment. And particularly, they should pick some streams where you actually have very active, almost overinvestment to provide sort of beacons of this is where we want to go. Green tech and health sciences could absolutely be leading there. And similarly, with the falling apart of US aid, the soft power opportunity there through science, through health security is huge. This is where both the UK and the EU are strong. And so as America falls apart, China is already funding around the world, but in terms of the trust that the world has in European science capacity to work with them to better their lot.
I interviewed a leading futurist very recently, and I don't mean a joke, I mean an Oxford academic that companies pay gazillions to tell them where the trends are heading in 10 years. And what he said to me, and I was so struck by it, is he said population decline is the most existential threat facing mature economies, and that we will soon be in competition for immigration. The first country to realize this will reap huge benefits. And I do wonder whether there is a way to openly advertise an active recruitment right now to LGBT academics and female researchers that may not be entirely comfortable in Trump's America and say, come, we have great institutions here.
There are some people already fleeing Trump's America. It is worth advertising and signaling to America that talent, and you can do it by background like that, but you can also do it by sector, because there's going to be some areas of science that Trump thinks are less important, whereas actually that's not how innovation works.
Right.
You could get a lot of invigoration off that. It is going to be a lot easier with scientists than it is going to be with wannabe tech bros coming out of India and things like that who think that, Silicon Valley is still for them. But nevertheless, global dynamics are changing fast. Scientists are phenomenally mobile and phenomenally well connected. And I think we can be tapping into that.
Quiet riot. Quiet riot. Can I just bring us back to AI and R&D in particular? there are those who want the UK to really beef up its AI prowess. If you are in the camp of AI will solve everything, that is the future, harness the power of AI, that overused phrase.
Yeah.
And you
so
might
a
therefore...
Tony Blair evangelical.
Right,
yes.
and you might therefore be in the area of saying, OK, well, I might be a pro-European, but let's not align on things like AI regulation. Let's de-align on that. To my mind, when you look at things like DeepSeek, that has rapidly entered the market in a phenomenal way, major challenger to ChatGPT, etc., the enormous amount of state funding that goes into being a major superpower on tech, it always comes back to the state funding. Now, our state hasn't got the money to fund that kind of stuff at the moment. While we might have all the great talent and we can open the visa schemes and we can have a good immigrant, non-bad immigrant kind of policy to attract them, whatever, without the state level funding, I don't see that you can really supercharge. And I don't think you get the money to be able to do that without growing your economy. And I don't see other things on the table to grow the economy other than aligning with Europe. So is there a paradox here? Is there a dishonesty from those that say we can have a little bit of this and a little bit of that and come through the middle and emerge as the best of both worlds?
I think that it is fundamentally cowardly trying to portray itself as being light-footed and innovative. Because essentially, when it comes to things like AI, what will make the real difference to productivity is adoption. It's like saying power tools are the way forward. But if no one's using power tools, then how is it going to be the way forward? How do you get AI into workplaces, into local councils, into businesses large and small, you know, the education of that. So if you think about what the UK government has done to date, it has basically looked at the EU trying to innovate on AI regulation. The EU is the only one that's taken this on, had the confidence to take it on. There is nothing at the federal level in the States on AI regulation, right? It's still a complete Wild West there. So what the EU has tried to do is say, well, look, you know, we've innovated on chemicals, we've innovated on GDPR. The world basically copies what we do because they think we're on top of it. We may not have the big companies, but we sure as hell know how to protect citizens against ill effects of this. And that is the big model difference between the States and the EU, right?
Has always been, right?
But now, but now that
at.
difference is getting supercharged, and that's where all the tensions are coming. So secondarily to the basic protections, there is how do you then adopt and integrate? Now, the government strategy of saying, we don't want to tie ourselves to something like that because if we don't, then more money will come our way, is partly true. You are going to get big companies like Palantir saying, well done, Starmer, you've done the right thing. Let's have more contracts with the NHS. You don't want any of that kind of regulation about private data or scoring mechanisms, whatever. Even though the EU was starting to do this very softly feeling its way, nevertheless, I think the government has oversold that it is an opportunity to not commit here. But what it will do is will pull in the big AI players into the big areas of power around the government, and they want to help set policy in the UK and drag it more to the States in order to start bullying the EU. I think that is fundamentally the wrong choice.
Can I ask something? Yeah. We talk about regulation as a generic term. Almost.
Exactly, very good. Yeah.
But there is a difference between rules that slow innovators down from getting to where they want to go.
Yes.
And rules which regulate the end product when it comes into contact with me, right? Is there a sense that there is a sort of middle Goldilocks way of releasing innovators from the burden of regulation while they're getting there, but really being very thoughtful about the ethics and the safety considerations of the thing once it's got there?
You're sounding like commission policy to me. It's exactly that. How do you let everyone have at it, but in some super sensitive areas, when people actually start using AI on the public, then how you actually protect the public?
And presumably R&D tax credits and other incentives can compensate for any break on innovation that an organisation might feel is coming from.
R&D tax credits, don't get me started on that.
No.
Think of all the opportunity costs of saying to companies, we understand that you did some work on research. We don't care how well it's done. Here, have some money. When you could be giving that money to actual collaborations between scientists and businesses and local councils.
I think you're going to have to come back, Mike. It's looking like this should be a two-parter.
I think we need a call to action, Alex. I know you've got one.
Migrate to blue sky if you haven't done so already, stragglers. Come on.
Ditch the plutocrat.
And certainly, I'm not one of the people that says you must leave Twitter. There is an audience there, and there is value to actually using Twitter to bring people across. But I say if you're going to generate a lot of valuable content, then don't put it in Elon Musk's pocket, that's all.
And if you care about these kinds of issues, then Open Rights Group are probably worth having a look at. They're defending UK privacy from the hands of Apple at the moment, and they generally do pretty good work trying to hold tech giants to account. We'll leave a link in the show notes.
I would echo your join Blue Sky, and I think follow the Bylines Network starter pack on my and also the European Movement and Local Groups starter pack. I just want to say on Blue Sky that I think it's a fantastic community building environment.
Yeah, I agree.
I mean, you can be there and sort of mouthing off, sure, but the way that you can marshal together action for lots of different things there, I think is how we should be using it over these next few years.
Open source
we don't have the trolls in yet. We don't have Elon Musk squashing us. Well, not really. I mean,
we have a little bit, but I never minded the trolls. I don't want to live in a place where no competing opinion or even abuse is present. But if you have a block function that works as well as it does on Blue Sky, I don't care. If someone goes too far, I can block the fuck out of them.
Blue Sky,
that is my problem with Twitter.
Blue Sky, please, could you implement soft block?
Next time I speak to Rose.
Quiet riot.
And now it's time for a little bit of good news. It's time for Grin and Share It.
Good news is welcome to me. Bad news is hell come to me. Good news. I want good news.
What have you got for us, Naomi?
Well, with all of the distressing, horrifying, upsetting, etc. news coming out of America, I thought I'd go in search of a good news story from the other side of the pond.
Okay.
We've talked a lot about science today.
It's not all on fire.
Yeah, we've talked a lot about science, but we haven't really talked much about the arts. And everyone, it seems, is pretty down on the arts, not least Trump. So it really warmed the cockles of my heart to find that the New England Conservatory in Boston has raised $11.3 million for music scholarships by selling a very rare instrument.
Ooh.
Now, musicians listening will be familiar.
11.3 million.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's going to be a Stradivarius.
Stradivarius violin, yeah. They're known for being the best in the world, and the Conservatory auctioned theirs at Sotheby's earlier this month and have chosen to put all the proceeds towards helping disadvantaged students access courses. The violin was crafted in 1719, is considered one of the greatest violins ever made or heard. So beautiful that Brahms wrote the violin concerto in D major specifically for this violin. And the piece was debuted on it in the mid-1800s. And I just think that was a genuinely heartwarming, lovely story. And
the person buying this
has not been disclosed.
Is going to play it, or
we don't know. We don't know.
Keep it in a glass box forever to be silent.
Listen, it's probably Elon Musk.
Oh my God! This was meant to be a happy story, but like everyone listening, their blood pressure's going straight through the roof.
Some Malaysian prodigy to pay it for him behind the scenes while he's at the front miming, pretending he's a violin virtuoso now.
Well, anyway, that was a short and sweet Grin and Share It for you this week.
It was a lovely
cheered
one.
me right up.
Lovely one.
Quiet riot. And I'm afraid that is all we've got time for today. An enormous thank you to our guest, Mike Galsworthy.
Thanks for having me on. It was great fun.
And a huge thank you to everyone at home who tuned in. We hope you enjoyed the show. And if you did, do check out our monthly subscription offering at ko-fi.com/Quiet Riot Pod, which gets you access to our Discord channel and invites to our editorial meetings and chances to get on Zoom with Naomi, with Kenny and I to ask us anything. There's another one coming up very soon, and the last couple have been very lively.
And if reading is your thing, check out our bookshop. The link is in our show notes, along with links to everything we've mentioned on today's show. We'll be back on Sunday, but for now, farewell, and keep on rioting quietly.
Love you lots. See you soon. Bye.
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 Quiet Riot is an audio production by Cooler Heads with Naomi Smith, Alex Andreou, and produced by Kenny Campbell. Music by Mariana Sangeeta, artwork by Simona Canelu, and edited by me, Alex Reese. Quiet Riot is a co-production with Sandstone Global.
Quiet Riot.
Now, I'm sure you're all wondering who actually did end up buying that violin. If you'll just give me a moment to demonstrate. And a 1, 2, 3. Of course, actually, that was Ida Handel in 1953 playing that Brahms concerto in D on a Stradivarius. If any of you did think that was me playing the violin, I have a Brexit trade deal I'd like to sell you, and I'll show myself out.